to Riftforge Studio, and this is part of our Legion tutorial series, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the Sons of Horus scheme. As you can see, I've already prepped the model here and I've used Colourforge Grey. Affiliate link is in the description below. And I'm going to start straight off with the P3 Coal Black as the base. It looks, kind of quite dark green. Even though it's a black colour, but it's a really good base for building up from this. So we're gonna get that all mixed up and get straight on with that. And just as a little bit of a preamble, you can sort of see here, this is kind of how that looks once it's applied. This is quite a smooth colour. The one thing you do have to be cautious of, I find, with the P3s through the airbrush is if you over thin them, they can, it's quite easy to over thin them for a start, and they can go a bit washy, so you kind of have to just get them applied quite carefully so they don't pool and those sorts of bad things that we're trying to avoid. So I'm just going to speed through getting this applied here. You can see straight off the bat that for the most part all of this model is going to be Sons of Horus green. So I'm just going to get this applied all over, get it covered in a decent application. If you mix this right, it'll dry quite quickly, so you can see I'm going over areas that I've already been over using quite a light spray. I'll take the magnetic weapon off here so I can get the rest of the body underneath the weapon sprayed. Get it all covered, make sure we've got really nice even coverage, get into all those nooks and cracks, because last thing we want is to have to look at reapplying the paint at any point there. And that's pretty much our first stage done. You can see there's a few issues with the lighting here, and that's thanks to my amazing day lamp, which is great for painting but not so much for recording. So straight into the next phase, you can see that's all dried quite nicely. There is a black element to it, but it is very much a dark green. So what I'm going to start doing now is building up with Lupercal green. This is kind of our mid layer. Again, it's part of the GW Air range. It's a tricky one in terms of if you are using it through an airbrush. It's not quite thin enough to use through the airbrush straight out of the bottle, so you will need to thin it, but it's quite easy to over thin, so you've just got to test and adjust really, and it's fairly straightforward once you know what you're doing, but yeah, it can be quite tricky. And another thing to remember with this paint is it will go on looking a lot brighter than it will actually dry, so just bear in mind, not to keep hitting it and hitting it and hitting it to try and get the saturation or the color that you want, but just sort of try to pick out some of those areas, as I am doing here, some of the slightly raised areas, some of the mid raised areas, to try and create that blend between the base coal black color and the dark green of the Lupercal. And just for reference, this scheme is going to end up being one of the kind of brighter Sons of Horus schemes. I know Sean, who's also in the studio, he may well look to do another alternative scheme at some point in the future. His is quite a grim dark style, whereas I wanted to build up to quite a vivid green colour just to make them stand out a little bit more on the tabletop. And also given the fact that some of the darker green tones, they're quite prevalent across a couple of different legions, so I just wanted to hit them up with that slightly sort of more brighter sea green type colour. So moving on from the Lupercal green, we'll give that a few minutes to dry, and we'll get straight on with the next layer. So that's all dry, that's all ready to go. And what we're going to do next, you can see from my glove, I've done some test spray. The next one we're going to do is straight in with Sybarite green. Now you can, if you want, mix the Sybarite green with a little bit of the Lupercal to sort of dull that intense brightness down a little bit, but I've gone straight in with the Sybarite purely because, like I say, I quite like that high contrast and that brightness. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try and hit the higher areas, some of the areas that we think are going to catch a little bit more of the light. And it's important to note that the tutorial's the tutorial. You can obviously take this and change it as you see fit. You can adapt bits to do what you've done. You know, the majority of this paint scheme has come from influences from from other painters. Some of them are on Instagram and YouTube, and I've adapted how I wanted to approach it slightly. So you can leave it, a little bit darker and just go for some of that really high contrast dark to bright. But as you can see, I sort of build this up a little bit, so you still get that contrast, you still get that difference between the dark and the bright. But the bright, where it is bright, is, kind of in your face. Also, being a Games Workshop air paint, it again can take a little bit of finesse getting the mixture right through the airbrush. The reason I started this section with some paint on my glove is because I did a couple of tests before starting with this to make sure I'd got that mix right. So moving on from the Sybarite section, I'm going to apply a final highlight, and this is just going to be kind of a spot highlight, and I change airbrushes for this. The workhorse I use for most of this work is the Harder and Steenbeck Evo. You can see from my Instagram that I was talking about that the other week. Here is kind of how this looks on another marine, and I've kind of done some of that work already. And what I mean by the final sort of section is you can go straight in with a pale grey highlight and really bring out that that increase in contrast, but despite the fact that I've gone for a brighter scheme overall, what I've done with the final highlight is temper the pale grey highlight with a bit of the Sybarite green, just to bring that final highlight down a little bit, so it's not as intensely contrasting as you might get with similar schemes. The pale grey I use for this is a Vallejo paint, and again, I can include all the colours that I actually use in this tutorial in the description of the video, so you can just check that out. But yeah, some tutorials will use it straight out of the bottle with a bit of thinning, whereas I've kind of, let's say, mixed it just to bring that intense contrast down a little bit. Although saying all of that, we do apply a kind of an oil and weathering stage, which is going to knock a lot of that back anyway. So we'll get to that later in the tutorial. So that's some of the final highlighting done, just picking out some of those really high raised areas, or some of the bits that might catch the light a little bit more than the rest of the model, and then we'll move on to the rest. So now what we've done here is we've gone through all that of the base layer of this. You can see off camera what I've done is I've followed Neil's decal tutorial from earlier in the channel's history. I've applied a couple of small decals to this in between applying the blacking out and metallic stages. It's fairly straightforward to do. I didn't feel the need to include that on the painting tutorial. So what I'm going to do now is do something that you'll see or hear some people refer to as blacking out. This is just sort of picking out all the details that you want to do in different colours. Mostly just for me anyway. The blacking out stage is it serves as a reminder of all the different bits that I want to paint, so I don't forget any details when I get to the end and think, yeah, I've done it. So yeah, this stage is just to sort of black out some of the details, the cables, the rims on some of the shoulder pads, or the metallic areas like the ammo pouches, the bolter, parts of the power pack, etc. So I won't labour too much on this, and as you can see, I'll speed through this quite quickly. And as you can see there, I've just sort of, even if you've overpainted a little bit, or some of that paint kind of runs into detail that you don't want it to, it's quite easy to clear up. Just wet your brush, try and sort of push it away, or soak it up, or sort of brush it off the model in some way. In some areas, I find actually if you overpaint, it can help with picking out areas. Not so much help, but you can offset it by applying scratches and oil weathering at the later stage, just to sort of cover that up without having to worry too much. If you are painting 60 Marines, for example, there's probably going to be a margin of error somewhere that you're happy with. My margin of error, just because of the goblins in my head, isn't particularly wide, so I tend to try and tidy those things up as and when I can. But as I say, when we get to the oil weathering stage, you can see how quickly it would be just to sort of cover those up, make them look like they're part of the model. So just whizzing around now. as you can see, I've picked out the soft armor joints, picked out some of the cables, picked out the edging on the shoulder pad, the icon on the knee. Again, being quite careful on the knee sections personally, purely because that's going to be part of the model that stands out the most as you see it from the front of the model. And then I'm just going to whiz through with the bolter, just to get all those bits done. Interestingly, for the bolter, the bits that we're blacking out, in the most part, this will actually retain that black colour. We'll just highlight it in a couple of different ways. So you might want to, in this case, be a little bit more careful with the blacking out on the bolter if that's the plan, or if you want to, apply a certain colour to the bolter, then, of course, that's up to you. So we'll just get the bolter out of the way again. And what we're going to do now is just go over some of those blacked out areas and start to hit with some of the metallic colours that we want to include on this model. And I'm going to start with the golds that will build up to the kind of the brass or bronzy type colours. And this is a personal favourite of mine. It's decayed gold, I think, or necro gold. And it's quite a good cover. It's quite a good colour, gives really good coverage, and it's quite easy just to use, actually in different stages, just to use this single colour to bring out different shades of gold, depending on how you highlight and how you wash. And actually, quite interestingly, it's the same gold I used on the edging on Big Horus's cape, and you can probably see from that, if you've checked that out on Instagram, of course. You can see how with the application of washers and a little bit of highlighting, you can create quite a good kind of tone difference between the curve, for example, of something like the cape or something like the shoulder pad, purely by adding a bit of wash and highlight. So be careful going around some of the detail here, but this is pretty much the only gold section on this entire model. These guys are seekers or vets, so I figure, giving them a little bit of brass or gold or, kind of different colour rather than just making them all metal will just sort of help them stand out a little bit. So now I'm just going to move on to doing some of the regular sort of silvery metallic bits, and this is a Vallejo exhaust manifold colour, and it's kind of like that dirty metal colour rather than it being kind of bright aluminium or necessarily gunmetal, something like that. But it gives a sort of, if you mix it correctly anyway, because they can separate quite badly, it gives you quite a good colour in terms of it looks a little bit dirtier metal, like it's had some wear and tear. You might be able to pick it out a little bit in the video. It doesn't look like a clean silver colour necessarily, but again, we'll wash that down anyway, so it'll help just sort of build that tone up slightly. So just whiz through picking out the parts of the metal that I want on the bolter. And again, I've seen lots of different people paint different parts of the bolter however they want to paint them in various different ways. I'm going mostly with a little bit of brown, which we'll come to, and then just the black and the silver, just to sort of offset so there's not too much green outside of the actual armor colouring. So moving on to the next stage, again, we're just going to carry on picking out some of the details on this. A little bit of washing involved, a little bit of again, just furthering the detail element. And this is what I was talking about in terms of I think this is a Agrax Earth shade, so a kind of brown wash adding onto that gold, and it'll dull it down a little bit, and you can pick out the specific parts that you want to wash. You can see I'm being fairly light-handed with this initial wash because I just want to create that slight depth, but then once this layer's dried, I'll actually go over and apply a couple of sort of darker spots to some of the areas that like around the studs or in the cracks and the crevices around the curve of the pad. And you can sort of see that as well from the knee there. I haven't washed the whole thing. I've just kind of gone around under that sort of bottom third to half of the eye on his knee, just to again create that depth, rather than just doing the traditional wash all over and then re-highlight and re-pick out the details there. Same on the bolt gun. I'm actually going to wash the metallic parts of the bolt gun with the same sort of brown to start with, and a little bit of black, again just to create that kind of that dirtier colour. It's an area of high wear, there's going to be a lot of hands, there's going to be a lot of kind of moving parts in terms of the weapon's exposure to the elements. So a little bit of brown in with that black wash, but then just sort of go all over and sort of pick some of the details out. Again, being quite careful not to just flood everything. I know in some aspects the wash or contrast, depending on how you use it, can be completely appropriate, you know, just to flood the area as you see fit, but that's not what we're trying to achieve here. So now we've moved on from some of that washing stage, what we're going to do is just look to try and pick out some of the other details. As you've probably seen from the model, there aren't a lot, so I'm just going to get a bit of browns down on the ammo pouches, just again to add that little bit of colour variation. And this is going in with the deepest brown, which I believe is something like a Rhinox hide or something like that. Again, I'll put that in the list in the description. But we're just going to hit it with a little bit of that really dark brown, and then rather than sort of washing and layering, as you may have seen on some of the other leather tutorials or leather images that people have painted, I'm just going to sort of chip away at it almost in striking motions or kind of mottled patterns to make it look a little bit more like, you know, actual worn leather that's got marks or variations based on kind of how it's interacted with by the model or the marine. So as you can see, I'm just sort of being quite careful but not covering the whole area again, because some of that base black will also help to deepen the variation and the appearance of the leather. That'll dry quite quickly, so just, you know, give that a few seconds. Similar on the bolt gun, I'm going to go with a sort of a wooden or leather covered handle and the grip on the weapon as well. Again, you don't have to, it can stay the same colour as the rest of the bolt gun, but I just think it adds that slight variation in terms of colour difference, so you aren't just sort of sat there with that 3 colour mix at the front of the model. And given that, you know, these being combi bolters are going to take up quite a lot of space on the front of the model, I just think it just helps break that kind of colour palette up slightly. So we'll just let that dry before we add some of the additional detail and that sort of top mid layer colouring over what we've just put down there. So now that's dried, you can see, or you will see, sorry, that we're going to pick out some of that detail in the sort of way we described before, which was looking at sort of striking motions, lines, dots, rather than necessarily trying to create a smooth finish. In the intermediate period, what I'm going to do is just add a little bit more wash to some of the deeper areas, as I mentioned on the model, sort of between the studs, a little bit around some of the eye on the shoulder there, and then again in some other sort of slightly darker places that we might anticipate to see a slightly darker shadow on the shoulder pad there. Of course, this is all a step that you can avoid if you want to, just using plain pads and decals, but of course that's user preference, and I just quite liked some of these molded pads, so I thought I'd give them a go. Quite a short step on this one. So even from the off, you can see straight away that that shoulder pad has dried quite nicely with the darker recessed parts. And I'm just going to go over it now with the same gold that we base coated it with. I'm just going to highlight and pick out some of the brighter areas again, just to change the contrast of the gold and sort of the interest of how we want that to catch the light, or how we want to sort of catch the eye in terms of the colour variation on there. So I'm just going to pick out the top edges and some of the curved edges, some of the studs, as well as the curvature around the side and the front of the shoulder pad. You can see, not trying to catch the whole thing, not just re-going over it, but just trying to catch the areas. In fact, that's a pretty good angle there. You can see where the center curve is actually quite highlighted and raised, leading those darker shadows towards the edges. And that's the kind of thing we just want to accentuate that with the colours that we're adding to the highlighted parts. So just going to go over a couple of parts, trying to avoid some of those deeper recesses, being really careful around the Eye of Horus section itself and the parts around there, and then the eye on the knee. And again, just with the raised areas on that etched brass, actually it gives us a good chance to even further increase that range of depth, appearance and colour variation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try and do similar. You can see if I can get it to focus properly there, and it's kind of what I've done is I've mixed that gold up with a slightly lighter gold tone, again just to further increase that kind of spotlighting effect. I think it might have been like elven gold or something like that I've mixed in, just to sort of raise that that bright colour element. Just going over again some of the final aspects, sort of the smaller aspects, to really sort of change how that appears. Again, this is all a layer, like a level that you don't have to go towards. You don't have to go this far. You can start probably at the stage before, or even just, you know, kind of a base and wash. But you can also see on some of this I'm giving it a little bit of a striking motion, being a little bit blasé with how I apply that, and that's, you know, potentially also adds to some of that difference in how the surface may have caught, you know, damage or whatever it is that we're trying to do. And then what I'm going to do is just take that second layer, as I mentioned, in kind of some of the lines and the dots and the striking motions on the leather, and you can see it looks really contrasted at this point, but it will dry a little bit darker and it blends quite well with the base colour. So you don't have to worry too much about it going straight from, you know, kind of that dark brown straight up to an incredibly bright brown. We will hit that point if we want to do it, but you might be able to see it a little bit better on the bolter here. You can see I'm just sort of using some lines and a bit of sort of dotted, spotted motion. Again, you know, trying to imagine there's a power-fisted gauntlet, not power-fisted gauntlet, power-armoured gauntlet, you know, grasping this thing, holding it all the time, moving it from place to place. It's going to add, you know, kind of damage or wear to that surface. So just sort of applying how that looks in a different way. And then just touching up some of the aspects of the actual bolt gun with a little bit of really, really light grey. As we've done with some of the other aspects of the black parts of the model there on the power pack and the soft armour joints, for example. And this next section incorporates a little bit more of probably what is the fiddliest part of this tutorial, and it uses the same principles that Neil laid out in one of his earlier tutorials on lenses. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick out the eye lenses on the model and the eye lenses on the bolt gun, which I believe I may have actually done off camera. But for personal point on this, lenses are often the thing that for a long time I struggled with getting them right. And actually, full transparency, I do the lens on here, but as part of personal preference, I do fiddle with things a little bit off camera just to try and get them right. And it's worth remembering that's completely fine. You know, you might do it the first time, and as long as your paint isn't too thick, or it's not, you know, kind of plastered on there, it's really, really easy to fix this process and make it look a load better. So what you can see is I've gone in with my base layer red. This is actually a black red from, again, Vallejo, and I'm going straight over the blacked out lenses that I've already done there. And you'll notice I'm not covering the whole lens with the base red. Actually, as per Neil's kind of previous tutorial, you might have noticed that you actually want to keep most of that surface as a dark black colour, or a really dark base colour, again just to really push that contrast of the reflective nature of something like a lens, particularly on a curved surface like a helmet like this. So if we can get that to refocus, just touching up the sections that I want to touch up. The base red is not really anything that I change too much over this. Just tidy it up off the helmet itself and try and get it to refocus. And then I go in with the second red colour, and you can see straight away, again, if I can get that to focus properly, it's a much more sort of bright in your face red colour. And what we want to do is we want to just add a little bit of that into the corner or into that bottom section, so it's not overwriting the dark red that we've done already. and just helps us, you know, kind of again sell that reflective curved nature of something like an eye lens on a helmet. And then what I'm going to do is the sort of the final two parts of this. You want to go for your small white dot and a small kind of section of a really, you know, kind of your brightest color in the lens. So this will be an orangey color. I know if you want to do, you know, you want to do green lenses, then there's lots of options for that. Of course, green lens probably wouldn't work on a green model without it looking a little bit too washed out. So I'm just going to go in, and as you can see, I've got quite a bit of paint on the white brush, so I'm just going to sort of take some of that off on the finger and just add that white dot in the corner. And this is one of the things I actually changed. I tried to adapt where the light might reflect on the lens, and it ended up looking a little bit like I'd tried to give him wonky pupils. So that's one of the things I actually fix off camera. I get rid of those white sections, repaint over them with a little black, and then put them in a spot that I'm a little bit happier with. Similar with the orange dot. The orange just needs to be, you know, kind of a small line that traces that bottom curve of the lens, and this, you know, although this doesn't look too bad, it just doesn't quite look the way that I would like it to look. So it's something that, like I say, I fix off camera, and that's something you might be able to see here. Again, it's not a problem, you know, the principle is the same. How you apply it is going to be the same regardless, and it's something that, you know, is really easy for you to try and fix and sort yourself. And I've done the same on the bolt gun. It's a little bit less showy because there's much less of a surface to try and do it on. But at the end of this process, what I will also do to try and sell that reflective nature of the lens as well is add a bit of gloss varnish on there. So while we sort of sort the lenses, we've moved on from the lenses, sorry, just going to go over with a couple of really sort of mid-level highlights on some of the raised black areas of the bolt gun. Again, just to sort of add that that reflective nature of how the light is hitting the weapon, and just to sort of break up that flat black surface a little bit than we already have done with the addition of the brownish sort of black wash that you can sort of see in some of the recesses there. So again, like a lot of the other parts of the model, you don't want to go too over the top with this highlight, unless of course that's your personal preference. This, you know, my preference is not to have that really intense contrasting line highlight like a couple of styles of painter do, and you know, that's fine. That's them, that's their style. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the style that I'm going for with this tutorial. So I'm just doing quite a faded, sort of slightly muted grey highlight rather than a kind of a more white grey that you might see again on some other tutorials. And that's pretty much that for the bolter. We might add a little bit of oils later on just to again add some of that grime and filth build up, but that's that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on now to some of the other sections and trying to just sort of add a little bit more depth to what we've already got. And you know, what we already have so far is looking pretty good. You could stop the tutorial at this point and give it an all over sort of oil wash, give it that filth layer. You could even leave it as it is. Of course, that's not what we're going to do. You can see we've still got a little bit of the video left to do. So first of all, I'll fix that lighting and just sort of have a little look at what we've done now. And you might be able to sort of pick out how I changed the lenses. They're a little bit more subtle with that reflection, with the red and the orange. And like I say, you know, it's looking pretty good. But what I'm going to do is we're going to hit it with some of this panel line wash. And essentially this is just a really thin black enamel wash, just to try and pick out some of those really sort of small, finer recesses, just so it doesn't look like they've been filled in too much with the armor paint. Again, they're probably going to have built up sections of grease or dirt or whatever it is from the kind of regular use of the armor. So I just think it helps break up some of those surfaces a little bit to add that black wash. Because it's enamel and because it's not water based, it it responds to manipulation a little bit better than some of your water-based paints that you might get, kind of from Vallejo or from Games Workshop. So we can just sort of dab it on and move it around the model. But crucially, similar to oils, we can manipulate this far longer after it's been applied than we could do with a water-based paint. So if you apply it in a way that you're not happy with, you can take a little bit of kind of white spirit or whatever your medium is in that sense. You can tidy it up, you can move it around, you can wick some of the paint away. You can see there I've used kind of the brush as well as my finger, or a little bit of tissue paper that we'll see later on, in terms of just trying to gently brush some of the surface paint away. I'm just going to drop it into some of these details, like you can see, quite ad hoc, just to prove that point. You can sort of drop it and plop it all over the place. Use a clean brush with a little bit of white spirit and just really tidy those surfaces and lines up, depending on how you want that paint to sit on the final model. And because this is a panel line wash, what we're really trying to do is not trying to colour the armour surfaces themselves. We are just trying to get that little bit of black grime just sort of sat in some of the recesses, like the grills on the front of the helmet, or in kind of around the armour studs here. And you can see some of that is really rough. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to manipulate that with the brush, or with a little bit of blue roll in this case, and just sort of give it a really light dab and brush and wipe. Again, you don't want to wick too much of it away, otherwise you have to keep doing it. And that's one thing that I think this tutorial does show a little bit later, is the oil gives you so much flexibility, and the stuff like the enamel wash gives you so much flexibility that you can, if you make mistakes with it, it's really, really, really easy to get rid of it, to get it off the model, to reapply it, and sort of reattack that problem, giving you that flexibility that I don't think you get with similar attempts with water-based stuff. One thing I will say, obviously, if you're inexperienced with oils and enamels, it's almost essential, if not kind of compulsory, to give it a gloss or matte varnish layer before you do apply them, because if you do have to manipulate them too much, it can affect the colour of the armour underneath. And obviously that's not really what we want to do if we want to get to this stage of, we've put in quite a lot of work to get to this point on a single miniature. The last thing you want to do is have to go back and sort of strip or reapply parts of the model. So what we're going to do is here, we're just going to add some sort of, again, dusty build-ups. You can see I'm being quite careful here, and I put quite a lot on in some of these recesses and sort of armour sections, and end up taking the majority of it off in some way, just to get some of those, again, some of those worn areas kind of built up with a bit of grime and dirt. Even though this force is going to be based on Zone Mortalis kind of industrial style bases, I wanted to add this layer again, just to add a little bit of colour variation and a bit of wear, just sort of indicating that they've built up layers of stuff from the things that they've been doing in whatever it is they're going to do. So just speed through this section, adding it all over the place. You can do this with regular acrylics, you don't have to do it with oils. Fair warning, it's a lot harder with regular acrylics. You have to use water, you have to be quite forceful with the brush. So I'm just going to, again, move off from applying that, get a clean brush with some water or whatever it is you want to use to do it. A bit of blue roll there, just to help manipulate the paint around the surfaces. And as you can see, it's starting to turn it into like a super fine wash, which again just helps to build up those areas and sell a little bit more of how that kind of that colour or that dusty element would settle in the different sections or kind of crevices on the armour there. So I'm just going to speed through this section. And again, if you're using oil or kind of a non-water based enamel paint or something with this, it's just, again, worth remembering, it's really simple to keep, to manipulate this after a long period of time, unless you've sealed the model. Oils, for example, it's not unusual, or if not, completely common, that you could apply an oil to a model and get it exactly how you want it, and if it dries slightly different to how you envisaged it, you can come back to that model the next day use a little bit of white spirit or whatever it is and just sort of manipulate or clean up some of the paint around the model that you've done. Again, full transparency, I did this just to mostly show what you can do to help with this sort of scheme. It's not something I'm massively happy with, so I would probably skip this step if I went back and did this whole thing again, but you know, it's part of the process, and I think it's just worth showing that that is an option of something that you can do just to, again, add that variation to the models that you're working with. So now a lot of that's dried, and I think that's, you know, sort of settled into the cracks and crevices that we wanted it to. Tidied things up a little bit off camera, again, made it really subtle in some places compared to, you can sort of see the slight dusty aspect around the feet and in some of the areas of the armour at the front, but I have tidied some of this stuff up off camera just to sort of, again, make it something that I'm a little bit more personally happy with. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start using some of our oils. And you can, you know, mess about like I am now. You can add it in really small bits. You can be really careful and cautious with it. Or you can do this. You can just blot it all over that model. You can flood an area. You know, you've probably seen some people who've done like really grimy Death Guard schemes, for example, where or Necromunda tiles and stuff like that, where you basically just cover the whole thing in oil and then, you know, kind of blot or push some of the paint away, wipe some of it off so it just kind of sticks in those cracks and crevices. But on this, we're going to use a couple of different styles. We're just going to either use kind of semi-watered down paint, or we're just going to dollop some around the model here to add. And some of these leg sections are actually the sections I was talking about in terms of you can mess them up, or you can be unhappy with them and you can change them, you can wipe them away, you can do as you please with them. So we're just going to speed through this section. Again, if you want a specific tutorial on applying oil weathering and those sorts of things, hit us up in the comments and we can look to do a more in-depth video about that exact thing, rather than, you know, kind of incorporating it into one of our tutorials. But you will notice from this, as I said, I make mistakes, and that, you know, everyone's human. You can make mistakes and then just find a way to fix it. And there's the first one. I overwater the section, clear it up, paint a little bit more on top, and come back to work with it. And there are loads of different ways you can work with oils in this sense. And now what I'm going to do is a little bit of feathering. So I've got, you know, a feathered brush that looks knackered. I think I applied tons of typhus corrosion to some tanks and stuff for this, so it's all messed up. So just really light brush strokes down to create those sort of streaks, like grime and oil are leaking from these armor studs. Whether they would leak or whether it's just, you know, kind of environmental effects or whatever. Again, you might have seen a slightly better example of this on my Instagram account, where I show a couple of Sons of Horus box dreads with a similar effect. It does work a little bit better, I find, on larger, flatter surfaces like tanks, dreadnoughts, terrain, those things. But I think you can still get, you know, a really nice looking kind of almost like seeping effect of grime that is just built up over time, dribbling from these surfaces, and they've not bothered to clean their armor, etc. So what we've done there is we've left this for a few hours, and we've come back to it to, you know, kind of let that oil paint dry. But as mentioned, it's oil paint. It's delightful in the sense that even after a couple of hours, I can still mess with this to get a look or an effect that I'm happy with. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to take a much finer brush now, and I'm just going to reapply some of the damage sections that I was talking about, that I ended up getting rid of because I wasn't happy with in their previous version. Add a bit of raw oil to some of these areas, picking out some of the damaged areas of paint that I'd done before, and just sort of having a slightly different approach and coming back to sort of change how I want to do things or how I want this model to look. Again, nothing really different to the last section. It's more just showing that you can still come back, decide you're unhappy, change things, and, you know, it's completely really easy to do. And it's something I think earlier in my hobby sort of life, oil paints and oil weathering were things I was almost terrified of. I didn't want to be putting white spirit and oil paints all over my models, and you know, all of these things that you grow up with the hobby thinking that it's Games Workshop paints or Games Workshop supplies or nothing, or you know, you have to do things in a certain way. But there are so many different things you can do to these models just to completely change the texture, the tone, the feel of the model. And of course you can do a lot of this stuff manually. You know, you can paint, you can see, you've probably seen people use brushes or sponges to apply damage and weathering. You can use that method in conjunction with this method. You can sponge chip all over a model and then pick out some of the bigger chips with a brush, you know, to show kind of metallic chips, or then you can just pick out those chips with, you know, kind of this oil rusty weathering type stuff, or you can do none of it. You know, if you're not happy with this stage, you want cleaner armor look, that's absolutely fine. You can completely skip this step if that's what you're after. If you want armor that looks like it's been well maintained, go for it. So you can completely skip this stage. It's one that I quite like because I just think, particularly with these models, if they're veterans or seekers, for example, it just gives them that idea that they've been around for a while, they've been in the field for a while, they're not really bothered about how their armor looks so long as it's still functional, and I just think it adds a lot to the model itself. And as you can see, I'm continuing to make mistakes or make decisions that I'm not completely happy with. So I use the brush, I use the big brush, the little brush, whatever it is I want to do, and I manipulate what I've tried to achieve, and I fix it or change it or push it around, make it, you know, get rid of it altogether, do whatever it is I want to do. And that's the joy and the beauty of oil paint, I think. Is that you can keep making mistakes. And if you're someone like me, you watch a lot of my videos, I'm quite prone to making mistakes or stupid decisions or whatever it is that I get myself into. User error, as people in the IT industry might refer. That's fine. So we're just going to keep tidying some of these sections up. Again, aware that trying to get perfect lines and perfect smears and smudges isn't really how nature works in terms of how grime appears, but just trying to make it look a bit more natural so it doesn't look ridiculous in my own eyes rather than anyone else's. So now we've applied those oils, I think, you know, we'll have a little look. They do dry a little bit differently. They're a little bit more matte, and of course we're going to apply a matte varnish over the top of the whole model anyway to take that sheen off it. But here's how it's looking so far. You can see those streaks have dried with a little bit more of a kind of a muted variation, some of the chips, and you can start to see there's a kind of grimy hue about the model now. It's not as, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, using that Sybarite and mixing that in with the grey can create quite an intense green. But if you start adding things like oil washers and weathering, it can really, really bring the tone down and sort of dirty, muddy things up a little bit. So I'm just going to pick out these studs with a bit of dirty metallic exhaust manifold again, just to break up that colour from all the green, and just to sort of make a decision that I wasn't sure I wanted to do earlier in this process. Heads up, if you do want to do this, it's best to seal the oil before you start putting water-based paints on top of them, because the white spirit that you've used to kind of manipulate and mess with the oils and the enamels, it can interfere with how that water-based paint dries on the model. But, you know, that's a fairly straightforward step, and it's, you know, fairly simple to do. And that is that. Here's the final model. Of course, I think, you know, a lot of that's sped up, and there's a few technical elements within there, like the weathering stuff, and some of the other bits that I've skipped over. You know, I do incorporate a few of the other tutorials from the channel, such as the decals and the lenses. And of course, it is a paint scheme that is very difficult to replicate in this way if you don't have an airbrush. Of course, if you want a similar tutorial on how to achieve, you know, kind of paint schemes, Legion schemes without the use of an airbrush, that's absolutely fine. Leave us a comment and we'll look at doing that in the future. I know that's something that a few other creators do the option, so it's not, you know, kind of airbrush exclusive. But I think this result, as you can tell, is pretty good. Not overly complex to achieve. You know, you can blast out the airbrush stages and the oil stages across 10, 20, 30 marines in a really tight timeline. Because of the flexibility of the oil, you've got a lot of time to play with and manipulate things if you really want. But yeah, for my personal like, I think this is a really good colour for Sons of Horus. It kind of gives that bright sea green. And yeah, it's how I imagined Sons of Horus when I got into the Legion last year. So there you are. Of course, if you've got any more questions, or you want to clarify any of the stages, or just want to say anything, you know, thanks, whatever else, we've got the comment section, and of course the Patreon and other things like our Discord, which are all linked down below in the description. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.